Welcome back. This time we're talking about The Dark Tower, the long-awaited film adaptation of Stephen King's 8-book epic series, The Dark Tower. Now up front, I have to say I'm a huge fan of these books. I've been reading them since the late 90s, and he's been writing them since the 70s. But this was always going to be a hard series to adapt, because this series, more so than just about anything else Stephen King has published, is unfiltered, undiluted Stephen King. This is a very weird, genre-bending, conventions-tossing series. It's a bit of a western, it's a bit sci-fi, a bit fantasy, action-adventure. You name it, it's in this series at some point or another. And the first book in the series, The Gunslinger, is a very unconventional novel. It has a very odd pacing to it. It has a character that you are not given much reason in the beginning to like, and it would have made a probably somewhat anticlimactic film. So I can understand why they decided to go in a different route. And if you have read all of the books, and don't worry, I'm not going to spoil anything, I'll have a spoiler-filled review up later this weekend, but if you've read the books, you know that there is a canonical reason why this movie, the events that occur in this movie, are different than how they occurred in the novel The Gunslinger. And I'm fine with that. And I think this review is probably going to be more positive than most based on headlines and just buzz that I've been hearing about this movie. The problem is it's a much less accessible film if you have not read the books. Now, obviously I have, so I cannot come at this from the perspective of someone who has not read the books. But upon leaving the film, I really was thinking this is going to be a hard movie to follow if you have not read the books. And if you have read the books, you're probably going to be annoyed by all of the massive changes between the text and the film. So I don't really know how successful this movie's going to be. For me, I would have loved to see an accurate representation on film of The Gunslinger. That would have been a very interesting movie for me. But since we don't have that, the question posed to me in this review is, was what we got all right? And I have to say, I do have some issues, and I will get to those, but if we're going to accept that this is not going to be an accurate representation of the first novel in the series, and it is definitely going to have some accessibility issues for those who have not read the books, what we're left with is actually not that bad. I had kind of braced myself with all of the early negative buzz for just a complete stinker. And it does have some issues, but it's actually not that bad. Like I said earlier, it actually has some entertainment value to it. And I'd be interested to see where they take it next if they do earn enough money to do the television series that they continue to be talking about that would follow this film. So what is The Dark Tower? As it's said in the opening line of The Gunslinger, which is to me one of the most iconic opening lines of any novel, the man in black fled across the desert and the gunslinger followed. They actually use that line, they kind of throw it in the movie, but this film is not really this quest across the desert like it is in the book. There's a lot more jumping around between worlds, and you get to see a lot more of this world around the gunslinger and the man in black and Jake Chambers, who we meet much earlier in the movie than we did in the book. So essentially, unlike the books, the movie is mostly from the perspective of Jake Chambers. He is a young boy living in New York City in a world, if not ours, very much like it. And he has been having a bunch of odd dreams that have led his parents and many at school to think that he's crazy. And he keeps dreaming of this man in black and these experiments that he is performing on children, all in an attempt to attack this dark tower. Through a confluence of events, he finds himself through a portal into the world of the gunslinger. Though this world may have once been much like ours, but it has moved on, and it is an increasingly hostile and dying world. And in it is the gunslinger, Roland, played by Idris Elba. And he is on a quest to find and kill the Man in Black, played by Matthew McConaughey in the film, for crimes against him and basically everyone he has ever cared about. And in Jake, he sees a way of finally catching up to the Man in Black and fulfilling his revenge. Meanwhile, if the Man in Black accomplishes his missions that he's using these experiments for, it could mean the end of everything for every world. It's hard to not compare the book and the movie, but the biggest thing other than the actual events that are different in the book is the fact that they throw a lot more at the audience in this movie than Stephen King did in his first book. In The Gunslinger, we have the gunslinger going after the Man in Black. The tower is only mentioned briefly until the end of the book, and we learn that that's really the true end game of this quest, not the Man in Black himself. Here we learn about the tower from the opening little words on the screen, and we see that the Man in Black is not this figure fleeing from the gunslinger, but actually active, performing these experiments and performing these attacks on the tower. Now, in later books, we find out that all of this was happening. But it's not until much, much later in the story, maybe not even to book 5 or 6, that we find out, really to the extent that we do in this movie, what was happening behind the scenes. So these things were happening, but it's a lot to throw at the audience, especially when you're trying to mix in all of these various genres and telling a very complex story. And I think that's where the film is going to lose a lot of non-book readers. As for fans themselves, it's going to be an individual basis whether they can deal with these drastic changes to the story. For me, like I said, there's a canonical reason why what's happening in the movie is different than what happened in the book. And I can deal with that. And honestly, although it's a much more conventional story, my biggest issues from a fan of the books is if we're going to go in this different route, there's a reason why certain decisions could be different. And I would have really liked to see the film explore those decisions on behalf of the gunslinger to really tie it into why things are different. The differences should have come from character decisions, not just because this is a much more cinematic story to tell than what was told in the first novel. And I don't think they got that across. I just would have liked to have seen more internal conflict on behalf of the gunslinger to really earn these changes. And I think that's really what it comes down to. The changes themselves I can get behind. I just don't think that the characters earned these changes. So that's about all I can really say about this movie without getting into major spoiler territory. Like I said, if you have not read the books, I think they're going to throw a lot at you. And whether or not you can absorb all of that to enjoy the story being told is going to be the biggest issue for non-book readers. Now, for book readers, you're just going to have to go into this movie knowing that it is extremely different than the text of The Gunslinger. And again, it's going to come down to whether or not you can get behind those changes. As I said, for me, I think I can. I just wish it felt more earned, because I think that would have elevated the emotional aspect of this film, where it would have been less gunfights and weird sci-fi fantasy elements and a much more grounded character story. And really, beyond the weird and everything else that Stephen King delivers, he delivers good characters. And I don't think they got completely developed in this film as well as they could have. I did like Idris Elba as the gunslinger. I did like Matthew McConaughey as the Man in Black. And young actor Tom Taylor, who I was not previously familiar with, I thought did a great job as Jake. I do not think this movie is a complete mess. I just think that it could be overly confusing for non-book fans, but I think it's a lot better than a lot of people are giving it credit for. So that's my opinion. But if you've seen it, what did you think about it? And please let me know if you've read the books or not, and how that affected your enjoyment for the film. As always, you can subscribe to my channel, check out some of my other reviews, and until next time, I'll see you at the movies.